Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. So, hi guys. I hope you're well. First of all, I'm very apologetic for my 2 years of absence. I was busy in one exam and then another exam and then another exam. So I did like 3 exams within this duration. And now that I'm through them, I'm back here with you. So the question that I've been asked recently, and it's probably a hot topic in not in news, because obviously, what do you expect from government sponsored, state sponsored channels? But it is a very big news in general public. It is a very big news in tabloids, and it's a big news in independent news channels. And that is doctors striking. And for people who are coming from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and from some, let's say, African countries, even Middle Eastern countries, because when they left their country, they're thinking they're going to a better healthcare system. They still think when they come here that we are well paid, and they are wondering, why are we actually striking? So I thought I need to do this so just to answer some of the questions, because people who are new to the system will probably not know what the incomes and salaries of doctors used to look like 10, 15, 20 years ago over here, and how much of a change has happened since. So first of all, what is strike? So strike is a combined decision to withdraw services by a professional body because of some sort of disagreement with policies which are set forth. Okay. So why do people strike? People strike mainly because they don't agree with something. They're unhappy with something. And why do people become unhappy? Well, you know, and I know there's a million different reasons to make someone unhappy. But to make a huge group of people unhappy, you have to have some common grounds. And the common grounds are usually, number one, working conditions. So 3-4 years ago, we had our junior doctors strikes. And over there, the dispute was the amount of staffing we had, the timing of shifts, and then the number of weekends we were having to work, and the compensations we were getting for all of that work. The rest facilities, patient loads, and all of that played a role. So it can be something to do with the working conditions. As you may have seen, in London, the tube strikes were to do with the government expecting the tube workers to drive trains underground through the night without paying them anything extra for that. The second dispute can arise because of the staffing levels, because staffing levels then mean, if they're inadequate, can lead to safety issues. Safety issues lead to stress in workplace, at home, and stress in workplace and at home can lead to sickness, which leads to more staffing levels and which leads to more of these issues going forth. So staffing levels can be because there are not enough nurses on the ward, not enough doctors, not enough consultants for the patients. It can also be because there's not enough staff to cover for sickness, for example. So, if a nurse calls in sick, hospitals struggle to find new nurses. And this has taken a worse turn after COVID, because a lot of nurses, number one, found it very difficult to work during COVID because of the working conditions which are set forth. So going back to working conditions, we had rotas where, because it was declared as an emergency, all the contracts were suspended. So we as doctors were being asked to come back every alternate day to do 13-hour shifts. We were doing a day shift and a night shift, and the whole routine, your day-night cycle, your sleep, everything changed. And that kind of adds to your stress. So that was one of the reasons. So a lot of nurses then left ICUs, respiratory wards, and the staffing levels went down. It's not just that. The staffing levels have been down even before. Every time there is a winter pressure, winter stress, they struggle to find staff because people, number one, are sick. Number two, there's not enough staff in NHS. I know I have worked on ICUs where the number of consultants and number of residents is not as per the guidelines set out by the Intensive Care Society and recommendations. And obviously, if the working conditions are not good, if the staff is tired, if the staff is sick, if the patients are being looked after by a reduced number of staff, there's always a risk or a safety issue. There can be safety issue because there's not up-to-date equipment available, because you've not put enough funds into this NHS, and you've not built and maintained the infrastructure. I can give you examples from a hospital I worked in, where a whole department was flooded because there was leaks in the roof or ceiling system, and they had to then get makeshift porta cabins and then establish wards there, and the whole reconstruction work happened. Moving on, earnings. So when it comes to safety, staffing, earnings is always important. And you're probably a lot of people who have come from, again, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. When I came, I was initially like, oh yeah, doctors are paid well. And yes, I am paid well. I'm a registrar now. I'm nearing the end of my training, and I do get a very fair compensation for the amount of work I do. But when I compare it against other people who have told me stories about, how much they ended up saving when they were at the same level, I am nowhere near there. And it's probably not having a huge impact on me personally. And I agree that just getting a few more pounds a month is probably not going to elevate my standard of living. But what happens is, over time, the medical profession attracts new recruits because it has a moral standing, and also it has a financial standing in the society. And a financial incentive is a huge incentive, and that attracts people towards medicine. And if you take that away, I don't think it is financially viable for students to take thousands in student loan and then end up paying that back throughout their medical training. The junior doctor training, and then when they're a consultant, they barely got rid of their student loans. So it has to make some sort of financial sense, and the only way to do that is to make sure that you kind of compensate them. And that is why this recent industry election, which is being done by not only the junior doctors, but also consultants, is important, because they know that unless we attract more people to medicine, and by increasing pay, and also retain staff by increasing pay, because a lot of people during COVID jumped ships because they found out, oh, okay, if I run a business, I, number one, do not have to work through an emergency, and I will be paid about 80% of my annual income anyways. So why should I then be a consultant? Number one, go into work every other day. Number two, look after more patients than I should safely. Number three, and then end up in, for example, coroner's court every other day to answer questions. Why can I not just run a business? Is that not more, relaxing for my mind? Will I not be better off? So in order to retain staff, then you need to compensate them financially. And that is what this government and most governments lose sight of. And also what happens is, when you're short-staffed, and for example, there is loss of life as a result, it takes a big toll on your mental health, because you don't want to be a part of system where people are losing lives because there's not enough operations happening. And we'll come to that, because that's another argument which is being put forward by a state-sponsored media corporation. People's knee and hip operations are being cancelled. But we'll get there. We'll discuss that in a bit. Then what people are unhappy with is staff morale, and why staff morale is important. Staff morale is important for two reasons. Number one, if the staff morale is low, they'll just leave your occupation. Number two, if staff morale is low, there's not enough teamwork. If there's not enough teamwork, it becomes more stressful for the rest of the team. And then people start calling in sick, and that is loss of hours work. That is extra pay you have to pay for locums to come and cover for them. And as a result, it has a bad impact on the organization. And where you were trying to save money by not employing more staff, you actually end up paying more money because you're paying sick leave, and now you're paying an extra shift worker who is coming to cover for the sickness. And as I said, whenever there is a natural calamity, for example, we've had floods, we've had COVID, we've had this monkeypox, which is called something else nowadays. So when you get all of these, one after another, and when media sometimes blows things out of proportion, it takes a toll on you. We were doing overtimes. We were being forced to work overtime. We were not compensated adequately. I do remember from my memory that, we had to go back to HR for one hospital because they underpaid us during the COVID times. In fact, instead of giving any financial incentive. And then we were giving this mandatory rota we were meant to work. And in this kind of country where there's freedom, having mandatory rotas is not inviting at all, not tempting to people at all. So what impact will it have on the system as a whole? So for example, someone just leaves the profession. And when they do, it leaves more work for people who are sitting behind. You then have to, on an emergency basis, interview more people and hire someone else. And that doesn't always go to plan. So sometimes you end up hiring people who may not be adequate or up to the post you're trying to fill up, which basically leaves the rest of the team more stressed and more burnt out. But I've also seen recently in the present years, when I initially started working in NHS, that was 2013 as an F1 doctor, all of the charge nurses on the ward used to be very senior nurses, very experienced nurses. And obviously through the years with the experience, you kind of become that cogwheel in the machine, and then you have an automatic response to problems. You can problem solve much better. And because of the short staffing currently, what is happening is, I'm not trying to say that people should not be promoted, but I'm just saying that the junior staff is being promoted to very senior level much quicker. And with that lack of experience, I'm not saying lack of competence, the lack of experience then contributes to the overall slowing down of the departments. And I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but I've definitely noticed it in my field. The quality of work which is coming out of there is not the same as a band 6 or band 7 10 years ago. So that has changed. What else happens is sometimes you have to go to the IMG side. So it's, the international medical graduates who then come here and work in NHS. And I'm not saying there is anything bad about it. I am myself an international medical graduate. I came into this country from Pakistan. I've been through training since then, and I entered it at a very junior stage, at F1 stage, where you're looked after and everyone supervises you adequately. And I'm very, very lucky that I entered this system at a point where there something called supervision was still to a high standard. The way things have changed then is it's these people who are coming from abroad have worked in healthcare systems which are much different to how things work in NHS. I'm not saying that clinical knowledge or clinical expertise or experience is lacking in any regard. Clinically, they're brilliant. But because things work a bit different, the guidances and policies are a bit different. The communication, there's a huge gap between British communication and any other foreign communication, even American or Australian, leave aside, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or the African countries. It takes them time, number one, to get used to the new healthcare system, and number two, to become a productive member of a new healthcare system. They need teaching and training, which itself will require time and financial investment. And because there is not enough dedicated teaching and training staff, and it has not been increased proportionately, for example, for the workers who are coming from other countries, what then ends up happening is these people are then pushed into the clinical environment where they're supervised by other clinicians, which adds to other clinicians' workload, number one. Number two, these people, before they could feel completely comfortable with the new system, they're being asked to do stuff that they're probably not very happy with. Let's be very honest, the clinical practice is not a big thing for them. Following clinical guidelines is not that difficult. It's just the politics and dynamics of the workplace which is new to them, and they find it a bit daunting or overwhelming, and hence cannot contribute to their full capacity. Now the question arises, what are the alternatives? And to be very honest, the alternatives there's a huge variety of alternatives. I know someone who was offered at a very junior level a very good office job in London by a pharmaceutical company, and they refused it because they thought they should probably finish the training before exploring other avenues, and which was a fair deal. But I can tell you that a lot of private companies would offer medical graduates similar to doctors a huge amount of money. Not just that, if they go anywhere abroad, for example, New Zealand, Australia, they offer more money than what they're offered in UK. So what is happening is a brain drain where you are recruiting people to med school. You're investing public tax money into those training institutions because you are wanting to generate more doctors. But once they become doctors, they leave this country and they go and settle somewhere else. And that is to do with alternative professions. So nurses per hour were making less than a shelf stacker who was working in one of the supermarkets, for example. Same is for healthcare workers, and these are the jobs. I'm just talking about supermarket workers, for example. These jobs are not high stake as nursing. They are not afraid of litigation. They don't need to have their separate insurances. They don't need to have a registration of professional bodies. So the expenses in those kind of professions are not as high as nursing. And that is why nurses had a strike and they settled for 5% pay rise, which was a bit unfair because then the other public sector workers were offered a 6% pay rise. And that brings me to the next question people are asking: why do doctors want more than nurses? I don't think there's a competition here. I think the nurses were offered a deal and they settled for it, and the doctors have also been offered the same deal and they've refused it. And it comes down to your negotiators, the leaders you've chosen. It does sometimes come down to the amount of responsibility and stress that you're put through. So I'm just going to give you a simple example. I'm not saying I do value highly all of the work done by a lot of my nursing colleagues. I still think they should have more than 5% pay increase. I would say 12, 13%, similar to Scotland medics. And that is what I would generally think is a fair pay deal for nurses, because I have seen nurses struggle through hard times, and a lot of friends of mine are nurses. I don't think doctors should have more pay increase than nurses. I think across the board it should be a certain percentage which should be increased every year. The reason doctors are paid more than nurses is because there are less doctors to the number of patients compared to nurses to the number of patients. So, for example, when one nurse is looking after 6 patients, one doctor for the same shift would probably be looking after 20 patients. So, even though the amount of physical work that doctor does may not be the same as the amount of physical work the nurses do, I pretty much appreciate the amount of work the nurses do. The amount of responsibility that is on the shoulder of those doctors is much higher. Nurses, when they have to escalate anything, will speak to a doctor. Doctors will speak to the registrars, and the registrars will have to speak to the consultants. And all of these are different levels of doctors. And the consultant sits right at the top and has to make all the decision, take all the responsibility. So, for example, a pilot, when he starts flying, has a annual salary of about 28,000. A air traffic controller, when they start, have a salary of about 40,000 British pounds. Because the air traffic controller is not responsible for just one plane and the passengers on one plane, but also responsible for all the planes in the whole airspace. And not just that, also responsible for the safety of the ground staff and public and whatnot. A foundation year 1 doctor takes home about 29,000. Year 2 doctor about 34,000. I'm reading off the BMA charts here. CT1 and CT2 takes about 40,000 per annum. CT3 about 51,000, and SD 678. So this is after 10 years of training, take about 58,000 home. Consultant, this is basic pay, by the way. So if you have to do more work, so this is additional hours or out of hour work, then you obviously get a supplement for that. Consultants take about 88,000 to start with, and after 20 years of service, they take 120,000 per year. Now then, if you go to any private sector and find top tier job, a director or a manager there who's worked with them for 20 years, and show me a salary progression of only, 30% in that time, I'll be surprised. And that is why I think there should be a good supplement to retain staff, to retain consultants. Then comes down to the last question, which is asked: is it ethical to strike? I think ethics is a big debate, and I don't get into that debate. Strike is a personal choice. you are offered an opportunity to strike. Obviously, doctors balloted, so majority of the doctors voted in favor of strike, and that is why strikes are going ahead. They're not mandatory, so even if someone voted yes for the strike action and then decides to not strike, they're allowed to. There's no coercion involved here. Even if you decide that you do not want to strike and then change your mind because someone ends up convincing you that you should, then you're allowed to. And no one should be persuading you in a way to change your mind. But if you voluntarily, for example, are watching my video and you end up changing your mind because whatever I say is making some sense, then yeah. The aim of the strike is to disrupt the service. And it's not to say that we don't want to work, because obviously whatever work is delayed, we will be catching up on it. So it's not going to be someone else who comes and catches up on work. And not everyone from within our body will strike. So even on a junior doctor strike, people who were doing some essential services did not strike. Consultants were covering all the services. In consultant strikes, all the junior doctors who were there were covering for their consultant colleagues, even though there was no elective activity. Some people don't strike because of the financial burden. Obviously, every day we strike, we're losing money. So, and I think that's fair. We should lose money for the days we strike, but some people cannot afford to lose money. There are people who are in difficult financial situations. There are people whose mortgages have gone up and their salaries haven't gone up accordingly. The people who are single parents and have to look after their kids, send them to nurseries. Some people partially strike for the same reason. So they strike some days, not other days. And some people have been in a tricky situation. So, some consultants were part of the admin and they were tasked with the force of finding staffing during strikes. So it would be very awkward for them to then strike. And then there are other people who voted no for strike and maybe are not striking at all, but I don't think any of them will return whatever pay increase they get as a result of the strikes. No one's going to ask them to, but I'm pretty sure a lot of them will take home whatever they can get as a result of the strikes. It frustrates me when, some state-sponsored channels are talking about, a knee operation got delayed and a hip operation got delayed. But if you talk to them, the waiting list for these operations is not into months, but into years. And no one is talking about why did the wait time go up to a year so sharply. And I think it's very straightforward. It's just because the resources were misallocated and the authorities who were sitting at the top, the health secretary, the government, and the finance secretaries, all of them were responsible for it. If you had put money, if you had provided the services, if you had hired workers, all of these surgeries could have happened much quicker and the waiting list would be much smaller right from the outset. It has happened right in front of my eyes, but then it's been growing year after year after year. And it's not really come down. Every winter, we see operations being cancelled because there's no beds in hospital. At the end of the day, you need more money to retain staff. And if you got more staff, you'll be able to open more theatres. If you got more theatres, you'll be able to provide more services. And if you provide more services, you'll be able to get rid of these waiting lists. So at the end of the day, you only get what you pay for. And if you want to pay for the services, then you will get the service. If you don't want to pay for the services, then you don't. And a very good example, a very set out example is COVID. All the elective activity was halted during COVID. And that was a very clear indication that this healthcare system is crumbled. It's been crippled. It's actually been incapacitated down to bones. Whenever you have a critical system, there has to be a contingency planning. You should be working with extra staffing, not understaffing. The reason you should have extra staffing is that you cannot run a critical system at its breaking point forever. Because whenever a machine is running, the cogs will have some wear. There will be a point you'll have to turn a part of the machine down and repair it. But if you work the whole machine to the maximum capacity or over capacity, you're not going to have that opportunity to give any parts of that machine any downtime to help them recover, to help them look after themselves. And as a result, one after another part of that machine will break down, as one after another staff member of the NHS hospitals then breaks down, leaves work and goes work somewhere else, leaving the remaining machine, the remaining part of NHS, even more stressed, even more crumbled. And whenever you go into one of these management meetings which happen, the general tone is money is not going to solve problems. You need a different way. You cannot pay for an inferior low-level plastic material and expect to get a titanium knee replacement for the same cost. So you are only going to get what you pay for, and unless you start injecting some cash into NHS and try and repair this broken, crippled system, it is not going to repair itself. Now, the question here is whether or not there is any intention at the level of government to save the NHS, or is the intent to privatize the healthcare system based on the inefficiency of a system which has been deliberately crippled. Believe me, doctors will be better off in a private healthcare system. There's private healthcare system in New Zealand, there's private healthcare system in Australia, in America, and all over there, doctors are much well paid than over here. I can debate that in a separate podcast if you want me to. But for now, we are striking because we do not want to take the blame for this government's inability to prioritize healthcare for the general public. And that is why we strike. And that is why some of you may want to strike with me, and some of you may find it really hard. And if you're finding it hard, then you still have an option to not strike. No one can force you to strike. And on that note, I'll stop here. Subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, and if you've got any suggestions how to improve things, then please drop a comment below. Tell me what you think about the strikes and what you think is going to solve the problems that NHS faces these days. Take care, and Allah Hafiz.